Welcome back to the Kaiser Report. I'm Max Kaiser. Time to go to New York and speak with Andrew Auernheimer, a.k.a. Weev. Weev, welcome to the Kaiser Report.
Really glad to be here, Max.
Okay, Weev, the TRO LLC, or TRO LLC, tell us about this hedge fund concept. What's the investment strategy? It sounds brilliant. Tell us about it.
Well, it's a multi-strategy hedge fund, and the primary and definitely the most romantic strategy is short equities. We identify outstanding liabilities in information security companies, and I've been doing this for many years, finding problems in companies and then reporting on them in an interesting and public manner, and causing volatility in the stock price of the underlying company as a result. And we hope to profit off of this by taking a short position, or something like a jelly roll, which is a put and a call at the same strike price, and it profits as long as it moves beyond the premiums. And we hope to profit off of this for an underlying reason, and that right now, if you're a software exploit developer, the only thing that you can do to monetize that is sell your software exploits, and we know who the buyer is. The buyer is the United States government and a few allied governments, and we know what they do with these software exploits, which is use them to spy on people illegally. And right now there's a huge debate with disclosure ethics that's been ongoing for many years, and the only solution to get out of this situation where software exploit developers sell their exploits in secret to governments is to create a way to monetize that doesn't involve unethical behavior.
Right. Okay. Let me just point out that this idea of identifying risks and then taking investment positions associated with those risks was something that we were talking about a couple of years ago. And there was actually a legal opinion put out there by the Washington Legal Foundation that examined just such a strategy. And they said this is completely legal and is, in fact, completely welcome to the markets because you're adding more disclosure, not less. So this is adding to the whole viability of the market machinations. So, Weev, I'm very happy to announce that you are listing on StartJOIN crowdfunding this associated project where you're going to be raising some crowdfunding. So can you talk about that, how that plays in a little bit?
I've begun soliciting attorneys to help me set up offshore entities, and it turns out this takes a lot more money than I personally have, and we need to raise capital to get the entities registered and get all the paperwork in order, and it has to be done right because the federal government hates this idea. They don't want people to cut in on their game of hoarding all the software exploits and spying on people illegally. So it's got to be done right so that they can't shut it down, and it costs money. So I'm trying to raise the money necessary to register the entities and get myself off the ground.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are pointing to the spy activities of the NSA and embedding technology into computers and routers from Cisco and this type of thing as being counter to the economics and the growth of the United States. You have Cisco, as a matter of fact, John Chambers, the head of Cisco, complaining to the government that you're cutting into our profits. So what do you say to the comment that what you're doing here is actually pro-competition, and you're offering some competitive aspect to what the NSA is doing? Because the NSA, what they're doing is leading to a loss of business and a loss of confidence and a loss of economic activity. Your hedge fund, TRO LLC, TRO LLC, is actually adding competitiveness. What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, what we do is inform consumers and investors. That's what I've been doing for years. And the underlying thing is that the internet has been the greatest engine of wealth in the entirety of the past century. There has been nothing comparable that has driven our society forward. Basically, there was a big gap between 1958 and 1959 when we came up with the integrated circuit and the laser and the advent of e-commerce, and our society did almost nothing in terms of development between these two dates. And we have to protect the internet, not just because it's the greatest engine of prosperity that we will ever have in the advent of our lifetimes, but deeper than that, from the human rights perspective, is that it's necessary to be able to have privacy and free speech for our civilizations to work.
Right, and let's talk about the current lawsuit. You are suing the U.S. government. You're seeking only from the U.S. government Bitcoin. You can talk about why only Bitcoin, but can you talk about the lawsuit that you're currently involved with?
Yeah, I'm retaining an attorney to sue the government. I was held unjustly for 14 months in federal prison because I did what I described that my hedge fund's going to do. It was overturned by the Third Circuit Court of Appeals because their case had not a leg to stand on. I did nothing illegal. There's nothing illegal about telling people the truth and criticizing large corporations. And my hourly rate is denominated in Bitcoin. I don't personally, when I do work on a contract basis, I don't accept United States dollars because Federal Reserve notes are a currency based on fraud and violence. And I will not participate in the propagation of an instrument of finance that is based upon fraud and violence. And I simply have opted out of the Federal Reserve notes. I have they're worth nothing to me. They are less than toilet paper.
Right. Well, I should mention that on StartJOIN crowdfunding, where you have your project listed, we do accept Bitcoin. It's the only crowdfunding platform really that does accept Bitcoin at this point. And so that will fit right into the project. I wanted to ask you about a report that came out last week. It was done by an analyst who's a Wall Street analyst who put out a sell recommendation on Apple Computer on ethical and moral reasons. He was talking about the fact that slave labor in China should not be condoned by anyone investing in Apple Computer. So suddenly, this idea that corporations have to be accountable is working its way into the Wall Street research mix. Is this a healthy thing? Is this part of what you're involved with? Is this a sea change in how people view companies? Weev.
Absolutely. I went to jail for scrutinizing Apple's products, and Apple has been at the forefront on the war on general computation, which is this agenda that the powerful have to shut down not only the internet but our right to run an arbitrary program on our computers. Apple is part of this slow process where people are being filed into these neat little app stores where they can only run an application, a program, with the approval of Apple. And the end goal is to have only computers available to consumers which can run programs approved by the authorities. And Apple, of course, not only are they morally degenerate as far as computational ethics, but they're also degenerate insofar as the ethics of labor. And they have factories where people commit suicides. They have to put nets up. They are one of the worst operators, really, and so across the board insofar as ethics goes.
Right. So if people were to suddenly recognize that there is an ethics risk on the balance sheet of Apple Computer, if that risk was realized, let's say by people not buying their products, the stock could be down 20 or 30 or 40% from this recognition of ethics risk or dissent risk. So your hedge fund, Weev, TRO LLC, is basically going to capture the spread between the non-recognition of ethical behavior that is prevalent today and the reintroduction of ethics into the conversation about business activity. So there's a huge spread. If you can capture that spread, Weev, this hedge fund would be the best performing hedge fund in the world. Your thoughts?
I'm more specifically punishing unethical behavior insofar that people are mad when their personal information is put at risk, and they react to that negatively. I'm unsure that people will divest insofar as companies that perform badly, but I hope that they do. It's not really that particular concern is not necessarily in my model, but we are seeing a general movement in the BDS movement, like across the board. We are seeing a return to ethical values on Wall Street, and that's definitely something that adds something very important to our nation.
So the BDS referring to the Israeli boycott, divest strategy?
Yeah, it's people are beginning to divest from Israeli products, boycott Israeli products, pull their money out of it in response to the treatment that the Palestinians have been receiving at the hands of the Israelis. And that's how the market should function, is that if somebody is a bad actor, then you should distance themselves from their products. It's healthy, no doubt.
Right. Well, the last time we saw something of that magnitude, of course, was during the apartheid era in South Africa, where there was a divest campaign for Barclays Bank. People got out of Barclays Bank, and that was really what spurred finally some action against apartheid South Africa. Now you have apartheid Israel with the apartheid wall separating Israel and Palestine. So possibly the same kind of action will bring them to the table and act morally and ethically. I wanted to just talk about your time in prison, because you became quite famous because you were tweeting from prison. And can you give us some more color, I guess you could say, about your days in prison? What was that like? What did you learn? What can you add? What is already known in the public domain?
Yeah, I made this pendant in prison. It's a Mjolnir, a Thor's hammer. I carved the shape into a bottle of soap, a bar of soap, and then I poured solder in on a cold day. And I read a lot of Norse poetry. I read the Havamal, the Fafnir's Mal, the Volundark Vita, which is quite excellent. It's sort of about a hacker who's wrongfully imprisoned, really. And I talked about classical music and the fate of Western civilization with like-minded people who had been put in prison on indictments that were brought for political reasons. And I came to a lot of conclusions about the decline of the West and what we need to do to move to the future.
All right, excellent. So we've got about 30 seconds left. I just want to recap some of the highlights here, some of the big points. So you've got a project on StartJOIN crowdfunding for this new hedge fund, which people can contribute Bitcoin. You're also you're going to be raising some funds in terms of your legal funds to pursue this lawsuit that you're seeking recompense from the U.S. government payable in Bitcoin. And so we're going to be following this quite closely. Hope to have you on soon. Again, Weev, thanks so much for being on the Kaiser Report.
Thanks for having me, Max. I appreciate it.
All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Kaiser Report with me, Max Kaiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Weev. If you'd like to get in touch, tweet us at Kaiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.